Okay, this will be a brief layout of reflecting on imagining or reimagining a decolonized future. How do we imagine a future that is not colonized? And I think this question is important, and I'll try to discuss some of the points without going deep into each and specific theme of the discussion. And also some of my observations would be somehow disjointed because they're not necessarily interrelated from one to another. This will be a kind of general observation on some kind of tinkering on the idea of the future and the idea of decolonization in terms of the future, or in terms of reimagining the future. When I say reimagining the future, imagining itself is an important thing to think about. It's not the thing that we imagine. The way we imagine is also very important. How do we imagine about the future? Or not just the future, how do we imagine about time? And through time, about existence, about ourselves, about nature, about the world, and so on. The idea of decolonizing the future is related to imagination, because imagination itself has been the object of colonization. People's imagination, way of conceiving, conceptualizing the future, has been controlled or taken over by existing systems and structures of power. These systems and structures of power, which have colonial character, influences the way we think about time, about ourselves, about other selves, and about also those who do not exist with us, or the future. So decolonizing the future, one point to remember, is about decolonizing the imagination of the future. How do we imagine the future free from the oppressive and dominant or hegemonic structures of thought, structures of power that exist in today's world? And another important point in relation to this is decolonizing the future is to kind of open the future for our reflection, for our own agency. Because existing ideas about time, about the future, about ourselves, I'll try to explain this a little bit later on, these things have dominated our capacity to imagine about the future. So the future is closed, is already written, is already predetermined because of these pre-existing structures and systems of power. But these systems continue to exist, continue to perpetuate themselves because we accepted them as definitive, as truths, as things that cannot be changed. The idea of a world that cannot be changed is an ideology in itself that serves the purpose of existing hegemonic structures of power. So decolonizing the future is refusing to accept the definitiveness of the present over the future. Refusing to say that the present is not determinant for what will come. Because people have conceptualized it, or located themselves in different spaces to think about the future. Some possibly think about the future from the perspective of religion or tradition or God or a supernatural being. When they think of the future from that perspective, that religion, phase or idea gives them a sense of a future they will be working towards. And in today's systems of ideas, especially in the education systems, education somehow indoctrinates children, indoctrinates us to think that the future is a world that will be produced by the things that we study at school. So the future cannot be anything other than what we study now, what we read now, what we are producing now. The problem with this is that unless the things we produce now, unless the things we study now, unless the language we use now are relevant to our lives, to our way of being, to our existence, to our relationships, to our society, culture, and so on. And if the things that we study now are relevant only to existing structures of power, like corporations, governments, and finance, and so on, then the future will not be ours. Then we will not have a place in the future. Because the future is being constructed with our own support by participating in these oppressive and hegemonic structures of power. We are creating a future that is not ours. So to think about the future is to critically examine, evaluate the relevance of the ideas we learn, the education we teach or we study, and the life we live to the diverse beings that exist on the planet. Now, decolonizing the future relates to that, refusing to accept the closedness of the future, and instead to reopen the future for all kinds of possibilities. When we accept different cultures, different lives, different types of existence in the world, being a human or a non-human, being existing in this world, or all forms of life have value in themselves and have this innate capacity to develop and realize their potential. So when we accept the validity and importance of diverse ways of existence in the world, then we start to think of building a future that accommodates all lives in its diversity. But if we at the beginning close the future as something that would only allow those who have power, like finance, like capital, like particular forms of training, we make other forms of life that make life rich. We make other experiences, cultures, histories, traditions irrelevant to the future. We kill them epistemologically. Right now, before we enter into the future, we close the future before them. So decolonizing the future is opening the future for all types of diversities, for all types of thinking, and for all ways of living and knowing in this world. And decolonizing the future is refusing to believe that there is only one way of understanding the world. There is only one history. There is only one life. Often in the sciences, we think of human history as emerging from, African jungle and progressing or evolving until it finally become a full-fledged Homo sapien or a full-fledged human being as a white European male. This form of thinking is also supported or corroborated by stories of progress that human society emerged from a traditional primitive stage and reached at a level of industrial revolution and being in enlightenment, writing about human rights, writing about philosophy and modernization in science, and reaching where we are now. This fiction eliminates other people who existed in this planet from the beginning. Because this fiction of understanding human history as a progress that emerged from a lower stage and progressed into a modern and capitalist stage is an ideology of Western history. How in the West, capitalists produced an idea of human history as a singular history that started to progress until now. Because with this narrative, the history of people who build development or modernization, who build the railroads, who build the palaces, who contributed their lands or were forced off their lands, and whose blood, whose death, whose labor was used to do all these great things in the West, their contribution is dismissed because they don't have history. We know the railroads built by the Africans, the rubber, the cotton plantations, the resources that are exploited and taken away from different parts of the world, from poor people. All these people, whether they are willing or not, they are made to contribute, to pay for the civilization we're living now. But the narrative of human history as an ideological, abstract construct that starts from a lower stage and comes into a higher developed stage because of science and technology is illusory and false, because that within that progress, inside that progress itself, there are millions of people, still millions of people behind the scenes of technological advances and progress. Billions of people are suffering, are dispossessed, are homeless, are stateless, and we also live in a climate crisis world. So the world does not have a singular history of a Homo sapien or a human beings starting from lower to higher stage. All the time there were lives at high and low, and over the time we see the huge rise of oppressive networks of power. Some people call them the colonial matrix of power, or the colonial structures of power, that use racial categorization of people, patriarchy, and capitalist economic systems to exclude so many people from the system, oppress them, leave them as behind, and contribute for the benefit enrichment of few people who are on the top. So this is the type of world that exists. But the narrative, the way we study this world, is a lie, a false, that hides this hidden history of violence, so that we don't address it, so that we accept it as true, so that this world, the way it came through and the way it is going about, is natural, and we cannot do anything to change it, and the only thing we should do is to fight, to struggle, to be part of it. And this type of thinking even dehumanizes people to imagine themselves as animals. Ideas like Darwin's idea of the survival of the fittest, bringing that idea into how societies, people live and behave, and dehumanizing our behavior so that we think in terms of rivals, not coming together as people who can collaborate and change the world. These ideologies are detrimental to so many people in the world. This is especially true, and this is especially concerning because we live in a time when in the world there is a significant amount of power that is being exercised by few groups of people who are not democratically elected, who are not responsible for the public. For the first time in history, corporations and some individuals have accumulated enormous power equivalent to millions of people. And in a world where this reality exists, where power, knowledge, is not simply serving poor people or individuals, but instead serving those who have power. The marriage between power and knowledge, the two going together, dispossesses, makes so many people irrelevant to the future. That is why we have to come back to the level and to that fundamental question of existence, where all life should be valued because it is a life living, not because of the other factors that are added on it after it inserts itself into this hierarchically structured world. So, decolonizing the future is rejecting the monopolistic possession that some groups are trying to exercise over the fate of the human existence, over the fate of the species, over life itself. And if decolonizing the future is about this and the decolonization of the future is necessary in this light, but it is not solely based on this existence of colonizing structures of power that we need to decolonize the future. The future, or even the present, is not simply an accumulation of power and individual control, but it is also a time of diversity, a time when so many people have started to articulate what they need and what they want in this world. So many people have become aware of the importance of their language, the importance of their culture, the importance of their relationships in the world, the importance of the planet, Earth, not just as a dead matter that can be exploited by man, but instead the Earth as a living entity, as a mother that breathes, that has its own life cycles, that has the capacity to regenerate life out of itself, recover and continue to exist. These conceptions of nature as a living entity or as a living being, and conceptions of diversity, the existence of different ways of knowing and belonging and existing in the world, all of this creates an enormous potential for human beings to enrich life on this planet. If we are able to challenge the structures of power, the colonial structures of power, that disempower people so that they lose the language to use their experience and tradition, so that they become irrelevant to the future by making only capital and technical knowledge relevant to the future. If we are able to address this, then this enormous possibilities that exist in the world, with all the technological advances that are available at our disposal, if we are able to share the agency that can be generated from this, then life could have a different meaning and the world can become a better place than it is now. So decolonizing the future is rooted in this belief, or in this epistemological commitment about possibilities. It's not based on believing that nothing can change, because everything can change, things can change, they are made by human beings and human beings can change them. So it is rooted in hope, in hope, not simply a wish, but hope as a political commitment that out of hope, out of what is possible, out of the potential, out of the diversity of life, nature, culture, knowledge, we then act to address those oppressive structures which make this possible life impossible. We need to address them. So decolonizing the future is rooted in hope, and that is a very important point. And we need to decolonize the future because of not only the future is built, or not only the future is being influenced by the present which is again a present built by patriarchal power, by capitalist power, by racism and so on. Not only that, because at the moment we live in a world that continues to recycle different forms of crisis in order to kind of generate certain disciplinary powers or disciplinary practices that could assist its perpetuation. Crisis has become these days the starting point of action, that people act out of crisis, not to prevent crisis. be it the financial system or the economic system, where elected representatives no longer control the economy or change the financial system to suit the disadvantaged or to put tax on the rich, that they cannot do that quite easily. Then the economic system continues in crisis in terms of the nuclear crisis that we have, that we are in a constant, perpetual fear that something disastrous at the level of nuclear weapon or nuclear war could happen in the world. Although some people worry about countries that do not have nuclear power, but we have to be worried about countries who already have nuclear power because they are the ones who used it as well. So that is another source of crisis. We have the ecological crisis or the climate crisis, and the people who contributed for global warming or ecological and climate destruction are not held accountable. Instead, everyone is put in one basket and made responsible, so that the existing systems that created the climate crisis is considered as a solution. So we act out of crisis. We act out of a political crisis. A crisis, instead of trying to address its inherent contradictions, tries to find scapegoats, migrants, indigenous people, as internal enemies of the system. All of these crises need to be addressed in order to have a future that is decolonized. And we need a decolonized future because we live in a world of silenced energies, creative energies, potentials, languages that can help us reimagine, reinvent, and live life in different forms are restricted from reaching their potential, from enriching our lives. So decolonizing the future is not simply going back to some, temporal location in the past and try to criticize what colonizers did in Africa or Asia and so on. We continue to talk about colonialism, about decolonization, because what happened in the past continues to happen in the present. The colonial masters who shaped the global economic system still shape the economic system. The people who were called primitive at the beginning of colonialism are still living a life that is as primitive as can be called, poor and impoverished lives. And the way we live in the world today does not make much sense after we arrived at a time when so many people went to school, so many universities are opened, so many people have access to the internet, but the infrastructure of power allows only few people to act and benefit and closes the door for other actors from benefiting themselves or changing their lives. So decolonizing the future is addressing these important points. Now, let me come back to the point and the relevance of decolonization with knowledge, and how does knowledge and decolonizing the future work. That will be my next point.